She was only 7 years old, but her body told a story no child should ever live through. Burns, fractures, deep, unexplainable scars. And when she was finally carried into the emergency room, unconscious and broken, her heartbeat barely held on. The nurse who saw her first couldn't hold back tears. The doctor said it was one of the worst cases of child abuse he'd ever seen. But what chilled everyone to their core was how long it had been going on. It was November 2022 in Fresno, California. A quiet evening for most, but behind one apartment door, the truth was spilling out. The kind of truth that doesn't just shatter a family, it exposes a system that turned its back. Because Caasi Monia didn't just fall through the cracks, she was screaming inside them. Police arrived to find a child clinging to life, her face swollen, her ribs broken, her skin covered in injuries, some old, some terrifyingly new. What began as a routine emergency call became a full-scale criminal investigation. And what it uncovered was a horror that had been hiding in plain sight. The people responsible, not strangers, not monsters lurking in the dark, but the two adults she called Mom and Dad, Raquel Clifton and Armando Gonzalez, a couple who on the surface looked like any other until the doors closed and the world stopped watching. Now, the question everyone is asking, the one that sits like a lump in your throat, how could this happen to a child for this long and no one stop it? This is one of the most disturbing cases I've ever come across. And I'm telling you right now, it will stay with you long after you hear it. It's the kind of case that doesn't just haunt you, it angers you because a little girl suffered for years right out in the open. People saw the signs, people reported it, but no one stepped in fast enough. And by the time the world saw what had really been happening behind those closed doors, the damage was beyond words. This story takes place in Fresno, California, a city in California's Central Valley, where life moves slowly. Families settle down and children play in the warm sun. But inside one particular home, it was anything but warm. And what happened inside would expose not just the cruelty of two adults, but the tragic failure of an entire system meant to protect the most vulnerable. You wouldn't look twice at Raquel Clifton if you passed her in a store. You might even think she was just another mom pushing a cart, scrolling her phone. And Armando Gonzalez, he kept quiet, wore a neutral expression. Not the kind of man who stands out until you saw the way he looked at Caasi, or the way she flinched when he entered the room. But for years, they blended in. Complaints were made, reports filed. Still, they stayed together and Caasi stayed trapped. There were no fairy tales in that home, only silence, threats, and pain. And now, after everything, the world is asking why no one stepped in before it was too late. This is the horrifying case of Caasi Monia. Caasi Monia was born on February 14, 2015. A Valentine's Day baby, the kind of birthday that felt poetic, like life had marked her with something gentle, something full of promise. She came into the world in Fresno, California with a name that sounded bright and soft, like someone who might grow up to dance barefoot in the grass or paint the sky with crayons from her bedroom floor. But life never gave her the warmth her name deserved, not even from the beginning. Her mother, Raquel Clifton, was already deep in the throes of meth addiction by the time Caasi was born. She wasn't the type of addict who struggled quietly. Her life was loud, chaotic, unstable. She bounced between rundown apartments, temporary shelters, and homes filled with people just as lost as she was. Many of them with violent histories and deep addictions of their own. There was no consistency in Caasi's world. No bedtime routines, no lullabies. Just flickering lights, unfamiliar faces, and a mother whose moods could shift in seconds. Caasi didn't grow up with warm breakfasts or goodnight kisses. She grew up with yelling behind doors, with the smell of chemicals, with fear. Those who knew Raquel say she could be manipulative when she needed to be, especially when Child Protective Services came knocking, because they did more than once. There were calls, reports, suspicion from neighbors. Family members, some of them holding back tears, said they tried to get help for Caasi, that they saw something wasn't right. And yet Raquel knew how to perform just well enough to pass. When CPS visits were scheduled, or even surprise ones, she cleaned up. She coached Caasi. She hid the worst of it. She had the words down cold. "I'm just a single mom doing my best." And somehow, time and time again, they believed her. There isn't much publicly known about Caasi's early days, and maybe that's part of what makes this story so hard to swallow, because it's in those quiet, undocumented years that so much harm happened, unseen, unknown. But there are glimpses. There are reports that as young as 2 or 3, Caasi had bruises that didn't match the usual tumbles of childhood. Daycare workers noticed she was withdrawn. A neighbor once recalled hearing her cry late at night for what felt like hours. But when asked, Raquel had excuses, and the system let her keep making them. Caasi was the kind of child who tried to stay out of the way. Quiet, watchful, polite in a way no toddler should have to be. Like she knew that being invisible was safer than being seen. People who met Caasi said she was gentle, not exactly shy, but always cautious. Like she was always bracing herself for which version of her mom would show up. She loved drawing. She'd press crayons so hard into paper they'd snap, like she was trying to add brightness to a life that felt dull and gray. She enjoyed cartoons, especially the ones with talking animals and happy endings. Her stuffed animals weren't just toys. They were her comfort. Her real dad, Caasi Monia, wasn't around much in those early years. No one knows exactly why. Some say he had problems of his own. Others think Raquel kept him away on purpose. But the one thing that's certain is Caasi needed him, and he wasn't there. Later on, when everything came to light, Isaac tried to step up. He became a loud voice for justice, pushing for answers and change, not just for Caasi, but for all kids who get ignored until it's too late. Caasi's story isn't about one bad day. It's about a childhood filled with fear. So many warning signs and no one really listened. Some people tried. Teachers noticed things. Relatives asked questions. Even strangers called in reports when they saw how Caasi flinched at loud voices. But somehow, Raquel always slipped through. She didn't yell or hit where others could see. She was quiet, careful, just good enough to fool the system. But Caasi knew what it was really like. She lived it. Still, she found ways to smile. In old photos, she had wide eyes and a smile that looked hesitant, like she wasn't sure if it was safe to be happy. She loved music. She hummed when she was alone. She lined up her toys with care. And when someone was kind to her, even just for a moment, she lit up in a way that hurt to see, because you knew it didn't happen often. She needed kindness, soaked it up whenever she could, and tried her best to be good. She learned to stay quiet, to shrink herself just to get by. But that only worked for so long. As she got older, the damage became harder to hide. Teachers saw she was losing weight. CPS was called again. By that point, Raquel wasn't alone anymore. Someone new had entered their lives and made things even worse. His name was Armando Gonzalez. He didn't arrive with any fanfare. One day, he was just there. But from the moment he stepped in, the atmosphere changed. Armando wasn't gentle. He didn't blend in. He brought tension and fear. On the outside, it looked like Raquel had a stable partner. But those who knew her felt something was off. Armando wasn't just another boyfriend. He was in control, and he made it clear he didn't like Caasi. She was a burden to him, and instead of protecting her, Raquel leaned into the relationship that made her feel wanted, even if it hurt her child. Armando had a history: drug problems, violence, past arrests. It was all documented. But Raquel either ignored it or told herself it didn't matter. She let him into her life, her home, and into Caasi's world. And once he was there, the abuse didn't just continue, it got worse. Neighbors started to hear things. The yelling got louder. The crying is more desperate. One neighbor, who lived next door, later told police she would hear Caasi scream. Then nothing. Complete silence. She said she always feared the worst, but didn't know what more she could do. She'd already made a report once. Nothing changed. Inside the home, Armando had full control. He didn't treat Caasi like a child. He treated her like an obstacle. And Raquel? She just stood by. Some say she was afraid of him. Others think she loved him too much to care. Either way, she let it happen. A cousin once noticed a bruise on Caasi's face. Raquel said she fell off the couch. But the story didn't add up. Another family member, an aunt, tried to step in. She wanted to take Caasi away, but without a court order or CPS backing, her hands were tied. Raquel cut her off not long after. And behind that closed door, things only got worse. Caasi was cut off from people. She was starved, kept awake, punished for things no child should be punished for. Dropping a toy, talking out of turn, fidgeting. The punishments were harsh and fast. And anytime someone got close to seeing the truth, Raquel and Armando would shut them out even more. By now, Caasi was 6, old enough to understand what was happening to her. Old enough to realize this wasn't how other kids lived. She stopped smiling. She stopped talking in school. Her drawings changed from bright animals and sunshine to stick figures behind bars or under storm clouds. Teachers became more worried. One counselor said Caasi seemed numb, like she wasn't really there. They flagged it, but the process moved slowly, too slowly. Armando was careful when it mattered. He didn't leave marks where they could be seen easily, and he disappeared whenever a home visit was planned. Raquel grew more distant. She rarely allowed surprise visits. If someone knocked, she wouldn't answer. Caasi barely left the apartment. She wasn't allowed to go to birthday parties, sleepovers, or even to the park alone. Family whispered that she had been locked in closets, made to sleep on the floor, slapped, screamed at, dragged by the arm, but no one had proof. And if anyone asked questions, Raquel snapped back with anger, "Mind your business." As the abuse got worse, so did the drugs. Meth took over the household. Raquel and Armando were often high, paranoid, aggressive, and unstable. The apartment became dirtier, more dangerous. Strangers came and went all through the night. Caasi was trapped in a place that felt more like a war zone than a home. And still, no one got to her in time. One family member who hadn't seen Caasi in over a year said she almost didn't recognize her when they met by chance. She was too thin, very pale, with dull hair and sunken eyes. She looked like a ghost. When asked if she was okay, she didn't answer. She just stared at the ground and shrugged. That silence would haunt them later. The worst part is this wasn't hidden. It wasn't in the dark. There were signs. There were screams, bruises, drawings, phone calls. But the system moved slowly. The red tape is thicker than the urgency. People who tried to help were blocked by locked doors and legal roadblocks. No one knew exactly what was happening behind the walls of that Fresno apartment, but everyone felt something was wrong. And when the truth finally came out, it was too late to undo what Caasi had already suffered. What followed revealed not just Armando and Raquel's cruelty, but the painful truth that Caasi had been crying out in every way she could, and still, no one heard her. What were the signs? Who noticed? And why didn't anyone act in time? The red flags were obvious, yet ignored. Caasi's life became a pattern of neglect and quiet cries for help. Each warning was a missed chance to change her path. Families saw the signs first. One aunt remembered how Caasi had become distant during family gatherings. Her once bright personality had faded. When people asked about her, Raquel brushed it off as shyness or tiredness. These excuses didn't sound right, but they were accepted, leaving the truth buried. Neighbors noticed things too. The thin apartment walls didn't hide much. Loud fights between Raquel and Armando echoed through the halls, often followed by a child's crying. One neighbor who lived below them said the noise at night was so bad, she couldn't sleep. Even so, many stayed silent, afraid of what might happen if they reported anything. At school, more red flags appeared. Caasi's teachers saw her schoolwork slipping. Her assignments were often unfinished and she stopped joining class activities. Even more worrying were the bruises in strange places and the clear weight loss. When asked, Caasi gave answers that sounded memorized. She'd say she fell or bumped into things. The school nurse recorded everything and reported it to Child Protective Services. But that report didn't lead to action fast enough. Doctors saw signs too. During a regular checkup, one pediatrician noticed bruises in different stages of healing. The locations didn't match normal accidents. When asked about it, Raquel got defensive and said Caasi was just clumsy. Even though the doctor reported it to CPS, it didn't get the urgent response it needed. Part of the problem was how broken Fresno County's child welfare system was. Social workers had too many cases, far more than recommended. One worker said they had 30 kids to track, making it impossible to give proper attention. The Child Welfare League says workers should have 12 to 15 cases max. That wasn't happening. On top of that, workers kept quitting from burnout and low paid, so the ones who knew how to spot abuse weren't sticking around. Over 4 years, Fresno's social worker turnover rate hit 107%, showing just how unstable the department had become. It didn't help that there weren't enough safe places to take kids out of bad homes. Some kids had to sleep on yoga mats in offices without showers or real food. These awful conditions made some workers hesitate to remove kids, knowing the other options weren't much better. Even though teachers, neighbors, doctors, and family all made reports, CPS responded slowly and weakly. Each report just became one more file in a huge stack of ignored warnings. Home visits were set up, but often delayed. And when they finally happened, they were rushed and shallow. Raquel had learned how to fake it, cleaning the apartment and telling Caasi to behave during inspections. Without clear proof, CPS didn't take action. All these failures added up to a heartbreaking outcome. Caasi's worsening physical and emotional state clearly showed how badly the system had failed her. The warning signs weren't hidden. They were obvious signs of a child in serious trouble. But the very agencies meant to protect her were stuck in their own mess, unable to do the one thing they were created for. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months while nothing changed. Caasi's home, which should have been a safe place, turned into a prison. Her silent cries were drowned out by a system that didn't act. And the people around her, whether too scared, too uncaring, or unsure of what to do, also failed her. Then, on a cold November night in 2022, paramedics rushed a young girl into Fresno's Community Regional Medical Center. She was unconscious. Her body told a terrible story. 7-year-old Caasi Monia had bruises, burns, cuts, and broken bones. Some old, some new. The hospital's trauma team, experienced as they were, weren't ready for what they saw. This wasn't just one bad moment. It was the result of long-term abuse. Doctors and nurses worked non-stop to save her, but her condition made it clear. Caasi had been suffering for a long time. She was extremely underweight. Her body showed signs of starvation. Several bones were fractured. Some injuries were weeks old, others were fresh. Internal scans showed damage from repeated abuse. The medical team, knowing they had to act, immediately called the police. That call started an investigation that would reveal just how much Caasi had endured. Detectives from the Fresno Police Department arrived quickly. Early interviews painted a bleak picture. Neighbors talked about loud, violent fights coming from the apartment Caasi shared with her mom, Raquel Clifton, and her mom's boyfriend, Armando Gonzalez. Some admitted they'd heard Caasi crying, but didn't think they could do anything. Family members also came forward, saying they had tried to get custody but were blocked by legal hurdles and lack of clear proof. As police looked into Armando Gonzalez, more disturbing facts surfaced. His arrest record was long, full of charges for domestic violence, assault, and child endangerment. In June 2021, he was arrested for hitting a partner. He also faced charges for threatening violence and putting a child in danger. These incidents showed he had a pattern of hurting people he lived with. But even with that history, he was never stopped. His behavior kept getting worse. Caasi's mother, Raquel Clifton, had serious problems too. She was deep into meth use and her addiction controlled her life. Because of the drugs, Raquel made bad choices. She cared more about getting high than caring for her daughter. Her relationship with Armando was full of fighting and chaos. Caasi was stuck right in the middle. As detectives dug deeper, they saw clearly many people and systems had failed to protect Caasi. People had reported Caasi's case to Child Protective Services, but heavy caseloads and slow-moving systems let it all slip by. Her teachers saw signs of abuse, but they didn't have the power to intervene directly. Even those close to her, neighbors and relatives, either didn't know what to do or were too afraid to speak up. When the news broke, the reaction was immediate. The community was outraged, wondering how this had been allowed to continue for so long. Activists and child advocates took Caasi's story and used it to expose deep problems in the child welfare system. Social media exploded with posts and hashtags like Justice for Caasi, pushing for change. Soon after Caasi was hospitalized, both Raquel Clifton and Armando Gonzalez were taken into custody. The charges they faced were serious and reflected the horror of what Caasi had endured. Armando was accused of sexual assault, among other crimes. Raquel was charged with neglect and for allowing the abuse to happen. Both of them waited in jail as the legal process moved forward. Their future now depended on the truth told by a little girl who had been through the unthinkable. Caasi's road to recovery was slow and painful. She needed surgeries and long-term physical therapy. But the emotional wounds were just as deep. Therapists worked closely with her to help her heal. Still, this path was hers alone. Her biological father, Caasi Monia, came forward as a strong voice of support. He promised to fight not only for Caasi, but for every child trapped in similar situations. Outside the courthouse, standing beside reporters, exhausted and grieving, he made it clear this should have never happened. He held up a framed picture of Caasi, taken before the abuse had stolen her smile. His words weren't just for her. They were for all the children who suffer quietly while systems fail to protect them. After Caasi was hospitalized, justice began to move forward. Not fast, not easy, but it started. Raquel and Armando stayed behind bars, waiting for trial. The list of charges kept growing. Child abuse, torture, neglect. Armando's sexual assault charges added to the public's anger. Prosecutors said they were working on building the strongest case they could. For Caasi's supporters, the wait was painful. The Fresno County District Attorney didn't share many details publicly due to the sensitive nature of the case. But court documents painted a dark and heartbreaking picture. They included statements from doctors, therapists, police, and family members who had raised concerns long before. Thank you for watching Crime Shade. If the story left you speechless, you're not alone. We uncover the darkest truths hiding behind the most ordinary lives. So make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what lies beneath the surface. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.